everybody. I'm live with Robert Hess. We are going to be covering the Eastern Division. Hope you guys are excited for week 3 of the Pro Chess League. Robert, how are you feeling?
I'm very excited. It's already been an eventful morning here. I had to make my way over here, but we're having a great time. We are ready for the action in the Eastern Division. And let us remind everybody of the format for the 2020 Pro Chess League season. Of course, there are teams from 4 continents, 24 teams in total, and the time control 10 minutes with a 2-second increment. So the games are fast, but we'll have all the coverage ready for you. And let's take a look at the matchups for this week. Alexandra, any of these you most excited for?
I'm always excited to see the Armenian Eagles playing, especially against the Russian Wizards. It's going to be Nepo's first game in the Pro Chess League, so I'm excited to see how he's going to do. What about you, Robert?
Yeah, that's going to be our primetime matchup of Russia versus Armenia. But of course, there's Hungary Hunters versus India. I'm super excited about that matchup as well. I love the India Yogis logo and also their team. And for the Hungary Hunters, it looks like David Navarro is not playing this week. So I want to see how they'll be able to hold up without him. And of course, we have our team of the week. Alexandra Grishuk spearheads that lineup. But there's David Navarro, not playing this week, but he had a great week too.
Yeah, I remember he went 4 out of 4 last week. Really impressive result from him. We have to also have Dr. Basim Arman. And as we know, he's a super GM as well as a doctor. So it's always fun to see him as one of the best amateur chess players in the world.
Yeah, don't tell the entire African continent that he is an amateur, but he is. He's a doctor. He's also a former 2700 player. But let's move on to our daily question because we're going to have fun with this today. Which top players' moves are the most difficult to predict? Get involved with #ProChess. And well, Alexandra, there's a reason why that's our question of the day.
Why is it the question of the day, Robert?
Well, we have a special prize going out for those premium members guessing the money game. We don't even know what the money game is yet, but the person with the top guess the move score in that money game will receive $50.
And if they're a non-premium member, they will get a 3-month Chess.com Diamond membership so that they can go back to playing Guess the Move and try to get those $50. Remember, we don't know what the game is, so try to guess on all of them because we are only going to reveal which game was the money game at the end.
Yes, and unfortunately, I asked, but I don't think we're allowed to win the Guess the Move, even though we are guessing the moves by commentating, but we'll leave that up to the other people. And let's remind everybody of the week 3 schedule that we had an event on Monday, and today is a day full of action. We have the Eastern Division covered for you. We'll start with these 3 matchups that you see we're running a little bit late, but they're starting just in a moment. And then, of course, the primetime matchup of Russia versus Armenia, followed by the Central Division, which, we'll have off for. So yeah, we'll leave that up to the others.
It'll be fun. You'll have Danny and Anna commentating those. So stick around, come back if you can't catch the morning. But hopefully everybody will be here for the entire time, right, guys?
I hope so. That's for sure, because we start with 3 matches. And then, again, to highlight our primetime matchup of the day, we have the Russia Wizards versus the Armenia Eagles. I'm super excited for the key game in particular. The heart and soul of the Armenia Eagles is Artak Manukyan, but their leader over the board is Zavin Andreasyan, and he will be taking on Jan Nepomniachtchi in the key game of that matchup. And Zavin Andreasyan shouldn't need too much of an introduction to the Pro Chess League faithful. He is part of the team that reached the semifinals. He has been a stalwart on their board 1 for the last couple of years, and he continues to be. But he'll have his hands full with Jan Nepomniachtchi, who is a candidate in the candidates for 2020. And he has just been a beast at the quicker time controls.
Definitely. And keep in mind that Zavin was the person who won the final match for the Armenia Eagles. So even though Nepo is higher ranked on the world stage, I'm sure it's going to be a very close match.
That's true. He defeated Li Chao in that finale. That was an epic performance by the Armenian Eagle. But, today it's a different day. It's a different lineup, and I'm ready for the games to begin. How about you?
I'm also ready.
I cannot wait to see these games begin. We were watching GM Joey, always been a likable presence on Chess.com. He's played, I think, more games than anybody.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
How many games did you guess he's played around?
I don't know. I'm sure we could pull up the numbers, but
putting you a bit on the spot here.
Way too many games. That's for sure. But enjoy it. He's very well followed, and we do have liftoff here.
There we go. First game.
Okay, we have Wei Yi with the black pieces. I was so focused on this Armenia versus Russia matchup that I totally forgot that China is playing today.
Yeah, the Chinese Pandas, who came second the year they played against the Armenian Eagles, one of the favorite teams to win every season. Extremely strong team. So they're going to put a very tough fight for the Israel counselors.
And Wei Yi actually had a tough go of things in his previous matchup. So despite his very high rating, he did not score particularly well. The China team will hope that he can help them bounce back, as they really need this matchup. Mm-hmm. They can't afford to lose to Israel if they hope to make the playoffs and go on a run after that.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be the favorites going into this match. But like you said, past performance also is going to play a role here.
For sure. And well, in this game in particular, we see that an early bishop on c5. So is it from a Spanish over Lopez? And this bishop c5 line is, in general, it's ambitious for black, but it also might run into a c3 type, d4 type of push, because that's what white tends to want anyway. So it might invite it with the tempo.
So if black wouldn't have developed his bishop on c5, would you have recommended bishop e7 or going for g6 and bishop g7?
Definitely bishop e7, although g6, bishop g7 lines do make their presence felt in the Spanish, but especially with an early b5, it doesn't feel like you have too much time to delay castling, and that's why you see that Wei Yi's already castled his king. And with his knight on c3, it's clear that at some point the knight probably should get to the d5 square, but whether or not you play d3, bishop g5 first is an important question, although black can always play h6 to eliminate that possibility.
Right. Especially now that he has the move b5 already made. It looks like the black light squared bishop is thinking of going to b7, in which case you might expect a move like d6 or d5 at some point. And if that were to happen, bishop g5 is really annoying because there's no direct way to get out of that pin without having to double your pawns later on.
Very true. And d6 is always a committal decision. He goes knight d5 right away, which fascinates me. But what I was going to say is that if this bishop came to g5, sometimes you drop your bishop back to e7 with the pawn on d6. That, of course, is not possible. But Yitzhak Steinberg seems to be in his wheelhouse here. He's moving quite quickly. We'll let the players figure this out. So many other games going on. Do any other matchups catch your eye?
Well, let's hover over the games. I guess let's just go to the next one.
Okay, let's do it. We have Wang Yue taking on Daniel Friedman. Friedman is a well-known monster on the white side of the Catalan. And, well, it's what we have here. The bishop on g2 doesn't look that excellent just yet, but it's much better than that bishop on c8, isn't it?
It definitely is. And speaking of the Catalan, I've often heard that the most challenging lines are where black actually tries to keep the extra pawn he captures on c4. And it looks like that's going to be the variation black is going for here. Yeah,
that's very true, because this idea of compensation for a pawn is often very vague, especially to players who don't know the ins and outs of every line of the Catalan. And, well, you can take this pawn back on c4, but what Wang Yue is saying, hey, have that pawn. I'm going to get your bishop perhaps just for a knight, and then with my bishop cemented on a square like b4, a nice dark square that your pawn can't go back and attack it from, that's good news for the black side.
Well, that is good news for the black side, but hard question for you. What are we going to do about the light squared bishop you mentioned earlier?
Play a new opening.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all the pawns are really blocking the progress it's going to try to make here.
Yeah, perhaps a c5 push at the right moment, but now it's not even possible. What I was going to say is try to play for c5 and then get the bishop out to c6, but with his bishop on g2 staring down the entire length of diagonal, not going to work out. So let's keep on moving. I love the name Chess Fat.
Oh, it's one of my favorite usernames from the first Pro Chess League I started commentating.
Yeah, and, well, Chess Fat Bear has a nice-looking knight on e4, hitting the d6 pawn from that square. So first glance, what does this position look like to you? Which side do you prefer?
All right, so Zhao Jun played an English here, which I tend to prefer over black's opening just because you have a little bit more space. It feels a little like a hedgehog for black. White is also ahead of development, so his queen and bishop are working together to put pressure on h6, which doesn't allow black to castle on the king side yet. And black also doesn't want to castle on the queen side because, well, that's where all the pawns are preparing to push forward.
Yeah, you have these two pawns here ready to get this one into c5. In fact, that might be white's next move no matter what, because now after queen c7, this knight on e4, it's one thing you have to know, it doesn't have any squares.
Right.
So if black gets one free move, here comes f5 to trap this knight. which says, all right, either I need to make space for it by playing with f4, or that's where he has c5. Yeah. And this is getting a bit dangerous for black, whose king is yet castled. The rook situation is better for white once the b file opens up. I definitely agree with you, and I like Zhao Jun's position here.
Yeah, and just one more thing to mention. What I think is really important in this position is the timing, because like you said, the knight on e4 is extremely powerful now, but with one move miscalculated. Oh, that is gorgeous. You know what? Forget it. This is a beautiful tactic. Let's focus on this.
Wow, that's so nice. We're just going to show you that after queen b7, knight d6 is check to the king and also a check to the queen. So he does not take it and plays queen c6. But now you can say, I get a free tempo. Let me just go queen takes c5. And once we trade here, you can't castle still.
Oh, this is a gorgeous position for Zhao Jun.
That was such a nice tactic. And
I'm surprised it came out of an English. You usually think that's going to be a much more positionally sound game, but you have this nice tactical motive here, and white just has a crushing position.
Yeah.
Or positionally crushing, obviously not enough material, but ahead in development. The rook's already on the 7th. He's going to be able to double pretty quickly.
It looks very nice for white.
Last question. You're playing black here. You're trying to hold on. What's black's best defense plan here?
Your king can't stay in the center too long, so inevitably you're going to have to castle kingside. But with this rook coming to the square b1 and just reinforcing the other rook on the 7th rank, it seems like white should be well ahead. But this knight on c3 could become a thorn at the right moment. If you have to take me, I get a new passed pawn on the c3 square. So that's something that white is going to have to look out for as well.
So at least black has some counterplay here.
Some, but not enough.
Right. We're just trying to, give black something to hope for here. You always have to have it.
For sure. Should we keep on going down the list?
Yeah, let's see as many games as we can.
Okay, well, we have the game between Gian Gopal with the white pieces and Benjamin Gladura with black. And I see the pawn structure. I already know it's from a Rasalimo, which Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana made very popular in their 2018 World Championship match. But Alexandra, when you see double pawns like this, are they necessarily that bad, or do we just give double pawns a bad name for no reason sometimes?
Well, the c6 pawn is actually doing a great job defending the d5 square where the knight would hop to otherwise. So they are effective at controlling the center.
Yep.
If we do get into an endgame here, then they will be more of a burden because it's hard to exchange those doubled c-pawns. Any move like c4 is just going to make your pawn structure even uglier.
Mm-hmm.
That knight on h2 looks a little bit awkward right now.
Yep.
And wow, we have a bit of a tactic here.
Another one, right?
Yep. So queen takes f4 doesn't work because of knight f5 discovery attack. Yep. And black just is not getting enough compensation for giving up his queen here, as much as I do that kind of move myself.
I wasn't going to mention it, so I'm glad you did. The Botez Gambit advanced variation, I don't know what to call it, but you're absolutely right that this tactically worked out for white. And this knight would love to make its way to g4 to put more pressure on the f6 square, but I think you'll see that Benjamin Gladura will not let his bishop leave to control that square, as he has both of his minor pieces preventing white from getting there, although a rook swing to h4 is not out of the question either.
And there's another important theme in this position. So we always talk about how minor pieces, knights and bishops, have the same numerical value. But in this position, would you say the two knights are better coordinated than the bishop and the knight?
I love this knight on e5. So the knight on e5 really, I just compare the piece by piece situation. This knight on e5 is beautiful. This knight on h2, you brought up before, not really doing all that much. So I think the knights can coordinate better in some ways, but for now, this knight has nowhere to go as the f3 and g4 squares are both covered. And I like Gladura's last move because he's already going pawn hunting. And he is part of the Hungary Hunters.
That's true. So despite his suspicious-looking king position, the king on g7, usually we expect a bishop to be there. He has much more piece activity, and white's compensation for that is potentially having a future attack here.
Yep.
So it's still a dynamic position where both sides have interesting plans.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that because the black king, even though for now it's all right, it might find itself in some big danger going forward. But I like Gladura's chances thus far. Should we keep on going down the list?
Let's go.
And we'll keep an eye out if any games get super interesting. For example, this game, I'm not totally fascinated by it just yet.
It's a little too early. I know you're not the biggest fan of the Berlin.
Yeah, these kind of, especially these types where it's like it's not symmetrical because white doesn't have an A pawn, which is good news as black will have to spend a tempo at some point. And this rook actually can come to A5 and help out in the attack on the E5 square. So I am starting to like white's position. especially because the capture on d4 is never possible with the. Well, and then it makes me wonder why the king's on h7, because e5 is a check with a discovery, winning a piece. And so I'm asking the question. He voluntarily went king to h7, which I don't really comprehend, if I'm being honest with you.
That's a very weird looking move. Maybe black is having the plan of putting his rook on g8 and pushing g5 as a way to get out of the pin.
Yep.
Black seems like he's not going to be able to take on d4 in the near future. There's no reason for him to push his pawns on the queen side. So the only other option is the king side. Are we going to see rook g8 and g5 here? Oh,
you called it.
We are going to see it. All right.
You're totally in line with
actually playing Guess the Move.
Yep.
Did you know that if you play Guess the Move, you might win a prize? If you're a premium member, $50 prize if you get the most correct moves on the secret lucky game.
You know, I was told that I wasn't allowed to win the prize, but I wasn't told that you're not allowed to win it. So,
I mean, with moves like this, I better be putting in some suggestions.
Well, you definitely have come up with black's idea, trying to break with the g5, but I'm worried about this pawn on e5. For instance, if I take immediately and play a move like rook to a5, just in order to protect the pawn, you have to play a move like pawn to c5, which isn't the end of the world, but it feels like black's position is sort of hanging on by a thread in a line like this. So
definitely. And now the pawn on g5 is also going to be more difficult to defend after bishop g3. So it seems like black might have to retreat and play knight d7 or move his rook back to e8. It just doesn't seem like his kingside attack is going to be fast enough compared to his structural weaknesses here. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Yeah,
bishop g3 is nice, just putting pressure on e5. Instead of wasting time with the rook on the a file, just go for the center right away. And so should we keep going down the list?
Absolutely.
We have Abhijit Gupta with the black pieces taking on Victor Erdos. And there's a bunch of pins in this position. It looks
I'm usually a bishop pair fan, but that knight on d4 found a really nice outpost.
Yep. And
it's definitely going to threaten some sneaky pins. White can trade off the bishop on c4 if he wants to.
And I have some knight e6 here. It's protected.
Almost. If the rook was on b8,
that's where it came from.
B8, that's why you're thinking of that plan. No, that makes sense.
So that's why I went back. But
do we think we're going to see a draw here?
It would make some sense, but if I'm white, there's no need to make a draw. Even if I trade off all these pieces here, white is in no risk whatsoever because I can just plant my rook here and say, well, what are you going to do as black? I just have time. I play king g2, pawn h4. And even if the game ultimately becomes a draw, there's no risk in white's position. So I would play on if I were Victor Erdos.
And that's very educational. If you're ever considering taking a draw, well, remember that you should have some fighting spirit. And if you're in a position where you're not really risking a lot, you might as well try to push your opponent for a little bit longer.
And there we see it, h4, which is perhaps choosing which bishop you want to keep, because after bishop takes f1, now you can either take this bishop or you can go ahead and take on f8. And if you think that leaving black with the light square bishop is better for white.
And is rook a1 not dangerous here? No, because we have king h2 escaping.
And thankfully, your bishop is not getting here because my knight covers those important squares. And the black king itself is not the happiest piece either. But still, it's a really very important question of which bishop would you rather leave black with? And I'm sure Victor Erdos will think about it before making it.
It does feel like you would want to trade off the light squared bishop just because you have so many light square holds next to your king.
Yep.
And even if black doesn't have a tactical technique right away, it is something to keep in mind as black will try to create counterplay in the future.
Although it is one of those funny trade-offs where you're totally right about the exposed squares on the king side. But one good thing about getting rid of a dark square bishop is your knight is on this d4 square, which would be an outpost against a light square bishop.
That's true, because the dark square bishop can be used to try to trade off the knight, kick it out. And imagine the bishop was on e5, you could take your knight, you'd end up with an isolated pawn on d4, and that would be a big issue.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where the squares are, and the light squares are weak, but the dark square bishop can help remove the knight. And so it's an interesting decision. He's going h5.
H5 is a very interesting decision. So g takes h5.
I guess then he'll finally take here because the pawn on f5 will be left undefended. So you just start the series of trades that we've been thinking about for a while, and finally I can take this pawn. And
now those two weak pawns are going to be an issue, and white is the only one with winning chances here.
Exactly. So h5 also begs the question for black, can you allow a move like h6? Because either there's going to be a pawn capture on g6 a trade, or h6, saying the black king is going to be in harm's way and stuck on the back rank.
Right, and often when you have pawns near your king side, you want to try and not move your pawns if possible and just keep the tension there. Obviously, g takes h5 runs into issues, but you can't just be hoping for h takes g6. That's not going to happen here.
Yeah, the tension will remain. It's very true. And well, bishop b5 is saying, I don't want the tension along the c4 square to still exist. So now the rook on b7 is under attack, and we see that the rooks are being offered. And we can see Abhijit Gupta on screen. And I mean, he's kind of like playing in the dark. He's such a strong player, but I'm just trying to get a read of him, but I can't see his eyes very clearly.
Right.
So I don't know how he's
The lighting is a little bit difficult in his room.
And rook b8 check, he's saying, take this on b8, watch out, because now 2 bishops are under attack. There is a check to pick up this bishop. So a little bit of fragility in black's position. So Abhijit will have to be careful not to run into any tactics with the bishops hanging.
All right. Well, that being said, maybe we should check on some other games as well.
We do have a result, if I'm not mistaken, unless this was just from one of the random blitz games I was following earlier. No, this is the Turkey Knights taking on the Croatia Bulldogs. And look at this. What happened here? There was at least some kind of attack brewing for white. And after h3 was played, because you can't take here, as I will give you my queen, because your back rank is a problem. So there's always important to watch out for those back rank checkmates. And in the game instead, he played h3.
Making space for his king. But falling into this unfortunate tactic.
Yep.
Oh, he missed knight takes g3 with check, actually a queen fork.
Yep, and after this, it's just whose king is weaker. It's pretty clearly white's because the checkmate will
even though it didn't seem like that from the first glance. It seemed like white was the one attacking, but
how quickly things turn around.
Exactly, just not enough space for the white king on the back rank.
No, you're right. It does really look like a better attack for white, but not working out. We have some results. Looks like our favorite username, Chess Fat Bear, has won his game. We liked his position earlier from the white side is English, ended up winning the game. And wow, all the results coming in. We have Benjamin Gladura losing to GN Gopal. And I guess the attack, the one we said might be an attack, black did steal the queenside pawns here, but the king is weak and you're down a piece.
Right. And I mean, that was somewhat surprising. We did like black's position, but white was the one with the dynamic advantage. So I can understand this result.
Yep. And all right, we still have a bunch of games still going on here. I don't even know where to take us. We can go to Wonderful Time because we're always a fan of his game.
The strongest I am in the world. Always a fan to see his games.
And what is happening here? So it was just a pawn capture on f5, and he's thinking, do I want to take with the knight, which wins me the d4 pawn, but probably loses me the e4 pawn, or do I want to take with the pawn, which reinforces the chain, but allows the white king to kind of slither into the f4 square where it's safe and potentially causing black some problems.
Right, and in that position, white would have the more active king, but the worse pawn structure. He has 3 isolated pawns, the d pawn, f pawn, and h pawn, whereas black's pawns seem more coordinated, but he doesn't have any pass pawns.
Yep.
This would be a very different story if the pawn on f2 was somewhere else. Maybe the e4 pawn would be a little more dangerous and actually tie the king next to defending it. But this seems like a balanced position because of the asymmetry, which sounds a bit like an oxymoron.
Yeah, but I think you're right that it gives both sides things to play for. And what I really like, I really appreciate it, is that with the black pieces, he has 2 minutes and 4 seconds now, but he's been spending some time here where a lot of players would rush the decision. He's saying this is such a critical moment that I can even get myself down to a minute and a half, a minute, and then play on from there because he's not sure the evaluation. He can even take with the king, I guess, to protect the e4 pawn that way. But he has 3 different options, and which one is best is not abundantly clear.
Definitely. And his opponent is also close to 2 minutes on the clock. So at least he can count on his opponent getting into some time pressure as well. Hopefully he'll come up with a long-term plan based on whichever piece he decides to take with.
And well, he's really getting himself down on the clock right now. The Croatian Bulldogs need every point that he can give them because they have struggled this season. They are one of the lowest rated teams. And that's what happens when you're fielding a team of IMs against Grandmasters. But he ended up taking with the knight, felt like the activity would be good for him, stealing the central pawn, and white's pawn structure is still split over here on the king side. So, okay, it feels like it should be a relatively level endgame, but we'll let them figure it out. So let's go to this game I don't even know which game to go to. Like every option looks pretty good.
Oh, that one looks losing for black.
Yep, the one that looks losing for black. And that, well, now we go over to Wei Yi's game, where how many pawns?
I mean, sorry, winning for black.
Yeah, here black is up a piece, and I like that. Put the bishop as far away from the king as possible. Then you can just use this G pawn as a distraction. The king will eventually have to come corral it, and then your whole position collapses. First E4, then D5, and the bishop tells.
Yeah, I mean, a piece up and a pass pawn with your king blocking your opponent's pawn seems like a recipe for success. G3, so he's going to sacrifice his pawn and, like you mentioned, get E4 and D5 back.
Yep. And very importantly, he still has pawns remaining, because that's the one thing you always have to be careful about. Have I traded too many pawns? And if I go king f4 and you take d5, I go king f5 to win this pawn. So we're starting to get into that territory where you have to be really, really careful. After king f5, you're like, oh, how do I trade black's last pawn? You're not getting there in time. So a move like bishop to c4, for instance, if you take on d6, I'll put my pawn a light square and then go ahead and win this pawn, and then win your remaining pawn after that.
Right, and it's easy to win the remaining pawn because you have an extra piece, so you have all the extra tempos in the world, forcing the opponent's king to move away if you're attacking his pawn, because your king can just protect your own pawn and attack his, and you move your bishop until that king's got to go.
Exactly, you can waste time. So
3 more games. Okay, they're moving pretty quickly.
Let's go to this game between Arvind Chidambaram and Tomas Banush, because I think this game is closing in on a split point. The problem for black is you can block here, but you give up your only extra pawn in the process. That's not good news, which means that we are going to see a draw by repetition, almost by force here.
My only curiosity here is whether black blundered to get into this position, because obviously he was pushing for a win with that pass pawn, or if white calculated something.
Yeah, it looks
where
like
he sacrificed his c2 pawn.
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, the c2 pawn wasn't even important. I would have tried to keep pushing the pawn, but no matter what, this sort of construction here is very hard for black to deal with, because you can
I mean, if his pawn was on a3, then he could have tried to block. But
actually you raise a very good point, because let's say I waste the move somehow. King
G2, let's
something
pretend.
like that, and we get this position. Now the pawn's no longer under attack, but even here, once you get the pawn to a2, it's not really obvious how black makes so much progress, because the queen has to stay attached to the pawn, and then white always has this idea of the queen e8, queen g6. So this would be a much better situation, because you got to keep your pawn. It's pretty advanced, but still not super easy to make progress in many variations of this nature. But
yeah, that's actually very instructive.
Yeah, just the king. It needs space to breathe and get out, but unfortunately, this time it didn't work. So we have 2 games remaining. We have an end game here between Francesco Rambaldi, who's playing for the Turkey Knights. And what's funny about that is Francesco Rambaldi doesn't sound like a very Turkish name, but he's a St. Louis University student with Alexandra
Sounds
Ipatov.
very Italian.
Yes, he is Italian, and he is with Alexandra Ipatov, and they are friends, and they not colleagues.
And Ipatov was the former U.S. World Junior Champion. Let's not.
Exactly. Ipatov, former World Junior Champion. They're classmates together, and so he probably recruited him, saying, "Hey, I'm playing for Turkey. Come on, be a free agent." And right now,
that makes sense. That's awesome.
Francesco just okay. Now it's even amount of material, probably going to be a split point, but he's playing an IM. This guy Leon Levajic for Croatia has been really tough player to defeat in the Pro Chess League this season.
And this does look drawish now. White cut off the black king from making any progress. He's protecting his a5 pawn. I think we'll see a draw agreed pretty soon. So maybe we can hop on to the last game.
Okay.
See if it's changed a bit.
All right. Well, we see a wonderful time. That is Tuan Menle with the black pieces.
Oh. He's made some progress.
Yeah.
He's up a pawn here. He's got a pass pawn. His king is close enough to help it try to get to the h1 square.
Mm-hmm.
And the time situation is crazy. They both have under 10 seconds.
Yep.
Which is much better for black here, since he's the one with a more dangerous plan. It's harder to defend in time trouble than to attack.
Very true. And he takes there. So that's a brave decision. But the great thing is this knight protects the pawn, and there's nothing white can do about it. So actually, this is a super instructive type of position where even if I didn't have this extra pawn over here, and let's say it was just king versus knight and pawn, your king can never actually attack this pawn and attack this knight at the same time, because you have your own pawn here.
And it's interesting that he didn't go for the idea with king g2 and trying to promote the pawn. He instead wants to win the b4 pawn first. He thinks that win is going to be more simple for him. There's no way for white to defend the b4 pawn with the light squared bishop, so he's just going to be up 3 pawns and there's just no tricks for white here.
The bishop's a great long-range piece, but there's only so much it can do when 3 pawns are there.
Right. 1 pawn, it would be a draw. 2 pawns, even that would be losing.
Yep.
So 3 pawns, need I say more?
Right, and now he's just at some point soon going to push this. All right, he's actually just taking the bishop off the board. We'll be up a full piece, and that forces resignation. So that means Croatia had a good round.
Yeah, it means it's going to be 1.5 to 2.5, which seems to be the score for all of the boards. Very close matches in the Eastern Division today so far. Would you have predicted something like that?
Honestly, I wouldn't have, but because I'm used to seeing blowouts in the Pro Chess League. But on that note, we are going to take a short break, but when we return, we'll be ready for the second round of the Eastern Division of the Pro Chess League. So stay tuned. And we return here. 3 close matches thus far, Alexandra. It was a good opening round.
It definitely was. I was most impressed by the Croatia Bulldogs. As you mentioned, they are one of the lowest rated teams in the league. So for them to start off with 1.5, 2.5, I think that's a very good start. But I could say that about a lot of the teams here that weren't favorites going in, just to show how much of a fight everybody has been putting.
Well, also, speaking of impressive, I'm looking in the Guess the Move, and the top guesser from the game that we last left off with Tuan Min Lei and Jemkan Gokurkan. Sorry if I mispronounced that. As Tayyip 99 with 10 out of 17. And I know Tayyip's very commonly in the chat and providing great suggestions, and no surprise that this user's at the top.
That's pretty impressive. There was somebody who was trying to get closer to him with 10 out of 42, but Taib got a really high score for the amount of moves that he did guess. So I'm guessing he was looking at different games and trying to guess the moves there, which is actually a pretty good strategy because you don't know which is going to be the correct game. So if you're getting in some moves for all of them, then
it's very true.
Yeah.
So actually strategizing, expected value, and well, efficiency is clearly Taib's calling card. Well, I'm ready for the next round of action to get underway. Are you ready for it?
Oh, definitely. We've had some interesting games so far.
Yeah, we really did. I mean, this last game was fun. That at first it seemed like it was about level, and then it ended in a victory for the Bulldogs. But I love it when matches are close because when it's like 14-2 in the end, I'm kind of like,
Yeah, I agree.
It's too much of a beatdown.
And just one more funny comment regarding Guess the Move. Taib said, I keep seeing that CM in all the other games. It's good to see they're both gunning for the first prize for Guess the Move. Keep going, Taib. You're doing great.
Yeah, that's funny. So, there's some familiar faces that who you're trying to beat in the Guess the Move. And, well, Wei Yi will try to play his best moves. He won that first game. We saw him win with the bishop against the pawns, against Nissan Steinberg, and Daniel Fridman, we saw have the white side of a Catalan.
I was going to say, this looks like he's playing the Catalan against the Catalan expert.
Yep, he is. He likes the bishop.
Do you have any tips for feeling like you have to change your openings when you play an opponent who is a renowned expert in that specific line?
It's tough. I mean, look at this bishop a3 night before.
They're just blitzing out this theory.
And you would look at this and be like, what is going on here? Like bishop to a3, and you put yourself in a pin. Like, why would you do that? But that's what happened in this game. So we'll get a board up shortly. And
right. And one reason why it seems less scary is because you have that bishop on e7, so you could move the queen at any time and your knight is still protected. Mm-hmm. Usually when you're getting pinned, it's challenging because you can't move the piece away without losing it, so that's why black isn't too concerned here.
Very true. You might swing that queen over a square like h5, where it gets out of the pin, and then you could play a knight g4 if you really want to get super aggressive, but that's a pipe dream at this point. You're not actually going to checkmate your opponent. But you never know. Sometimes you don't see things.
Right. And big question for black here. The bishop on c8 yet again. We can't push b6, and there's no knights blocking the bishop's long diagonal here. So maybe he's going to have to try to push the e-pawn at some point. It doesn't look like it's going to be in the near future. Or move his rook off of a8 so that he can push b6.
There's a reason why he's spending time here, because exactly what you're saying. The bishop can't really move without just losing a pawn. And honestly, white has great control over the queen side. This rook on d8 looks like it's a nice open file, but it's not accomplishing anything. It's just staring down an open line without any real threat. So I like white's position. I love these Catalan bishops, and this will be the story of the game, I feel like.
Nicely put. Queen c7 getting out of the pin. We'll come back to this game. We'll check on some of the other openings, see if there's...
Yes, let's do that indeed. So we have so many good options. Let us find the game that's more aggressive. Instead of all these positional battles, let us find a game where there might be some good attacking chances, like this one.
Yeah, we're this is a chess show after all, so we can pick some fun games.
And you probably recognize what this opening looks like. It's from your favorite opening.
Of course, the French, the King's Indian attack.
Yep.
And in this line, white is always getting a lot of aggression on the king side. White always has a really powerful attack. Black gets a ton of space on the queen side. Mm-hmm. And usually black can fend off the attack from white, in classical games with a lot of precise moves. But I find the King's Indian attack very challenging to play in rapid games because you always have to be careful of sacrifices on h6 in this position. Yep. And if you look at it, all of white's minor pieces are on the king side. That's a little terrifying.
You're absolutely right, because in general, we're talking about a queenside launch of pawns for black, but a potential kingside attack. And so it does seem more scary. You have to think harder to make sure you don't lose in the spot. But as we see on the screen there, we have Grandmaster Dastan trying to figure it out. Hey, is a sacrifice going to be on the horizon? And a queen d2, just to launch all your pieces over there, is that going to cause defeat? But black put a knight on h7 after e5. I felt like typically the knight goes to d7. But it's an extra defender here, which might mean a knight to g5 at some moment, but that is quickly becoming harder to play if you don't do it quite soon.
Definitely. Although black is pushing b4 very quickly, as if he's not afraid of the attack here. When studying these lines, you often put these positions into the computer, and it does help you see if there's any tactics that you have to keep in mind. So I would say it seems like he is pretty confident here.
Yeah, and c4, one of those type of breaks where you say, well, it doesn't just let you trade queens if d takes c4, d takes c4, but in addition to the pressure on the king side, white often wants a cement a pawn here. And especially if you allow a knight into d6 at some moment, it can really backfire for black because structurally you push your pawns very far, which can be good if you're getting some sort of initiative or space.
And the issue with this position would be that black would no longer have the better end game necessarily, and which is something you usually do get out of a French defense.
Right, because you usually have a very solid structure. And here, because you've thrown all your pawns down the board, it might be a little bit too loose in certain lines. But I don't even think that's the end of the world. I think that Sventika will have a lot to figure out here, but I think the French is holding up okay.
All right, well, let's come back to it and see if you're right later on.
How about this game? Because I don't know what went wrong, but as I look and hover over the board, white is an exchange up and black's king is on f8.
Yeah, this is definitely a wild game. We have a battle of the IMs here, and there's not as many IMs in this Pro Chess League since we removed the rating cap. So looking at this position right away, I like white because obviously we have the material advantage, and it seems like we're going to get some attacking chances. The pawn on c6 is hanging, although I don't know if I want to take it right away because knight g5 or just other attacking ideas look so much more threatening here.
I like knight g5. In fact, I might just pick up one of these pawns on the king side. And I just saw how this happened. I was just reading the game notation. White went bishop h6, and I guess black foresaw some kind of devastating attack and needed this bishop, so he voluntarily checked your face.
This is very uncommon. You see that if your rook is on e8, which sometimes black does if he really wants to keep his bishop.
Yep.
But what kind of attack scares you so much that you play bishop h8?
And you're not even getting a pawn for it. Like, you want to exchange for a pawn, and there's even number of pawns, and as we see the game continue, I mean, I could steal another pawn if I want. Just take this one. Yeah, this is
really rough. Okay.
And look at you. You know this bishop that you have the dark square bishop, your opponent doesn't. How good is that bishop here? It's kind of wall.
No, it's terrible.
No, this is not good. And we have Leon Levaich on screen here, and honestly, he has really been the reason that the Croatia Bulldogs have been quite competitive, because we know that Wonderful Time is going to make his mark on the event, but he's a surprise weapon for the Bulldogs.
So he's been scoring very well this season so far.
And he's been playing well. And that's the thing. When you're in a team event, you've played in several Olympiads, even if you end up losing a match, it's very important to have like the hope.
Yeah.
Because if some board's just getting crushed all the time and you're like, wait, we're already starting down.
Well, they would probably bench that player. So
right. And a very important decision just made. He opens up at least some line for the bishop on h8, but he's trying to crack black's pawn structure here. And by putting the pawn e6, and if you take it, now perhaps I can take on c6 as I have a follow-up with a pawn to capture on the e6 square.
Well, it's definitely easy to find plans for white here, but it is tricky to find the most precise blow, so to say.
Yep, and trying to force the issue, but we can let these players, I think that
this looks great for white.
So where to next? We have many different games that we can still choose. I'll try to pick a random one.
For sure. If you see one you hovered over that looks interesting, let's go to it.
All right, let's do it. Let's pick up Alexandra Ipatov with the white pieces.
We were talking about him earlier and how he recruited his friend to play for the same team. So let's check how he's doing here.
Well, he's up a pawn temporarily.
He is up a pawn, but it seems like black does have some compensation, like you just pointed out. Bishop takes c3 is a threat, so if white tries to defend it, what is black's follow-up going to be?
Yeah, I guess, if white gets one more move to protect it, then you may really suffer being down a pawn. The good news is, look, he actually didn't take it right away because white can't castle.
Yep.
So by attacking g2, you might be encouraging him with a pawn to f3, but then all of a sudden my king feels weaker when we get into lines like this, where also the second rank can become a bit of an issue.
This strikes me as a position where a gambit went correctly, where you're getting enough compensation for the pawn you sacrifice. The king is not going to castle on the queen side here, and once he does castle on the king side, he's already weakening it with the pawn push, like you said, but also that rook on g8 is pointing towards the king side. He's going to try to go for some h5 pawn push. the light squared bishop is really powerful, also controlling the long diagonals. So Black's just going to have a very clear plan of trying to storm the king as quickly as possible, as we see here.
Yeah, and the h5 played to go h4. The one thing that can go wrong by pushing your pawns and not regaining the material is if you let the side have the material for too long, you may never regain it.
That's true, which is why he has to be dynamic. Whenever you're giving up material, you always talk about short-term advantage and long-term advantage. Black has the dynamic play, but he would be lost if he's not going to get an attack and somehow he gets into an endgame of pawn down. That would not be a good look.
I actually wonder if White could have tried queen to d2 a move ago, which protects c3 and the g2 pawn. So just trying to say h4, you might be able to play it, but you have to think about all the tactics that will
right. And also,
follow.
Black could potentially take on c3. No, because he can take back with a queen, and then a4 is protected. So that's a good find.
Yeah, and
although if you trade the queens, then h4 is looking annoying again.
Yep.
So there's just a lot to consider here now. f3 is maybe hanging.
Yep, all this stuff is hanging. You're right. I mean, your h5, h4 idea is certainly what wants. And look at he gives up on the knight because he wants h4 so badly.
It's just so much more powerful here.
Well, I have a question. What if I go h4 myself? Because before my bishop was hanging, now my king protects it, and you're not really going to sacrifice. I know you're bringing my king out by sacrificing on g3, but you're giving up too much.
It feels a bit like a house built out of toothpicks. If there's going to be a slight breeze, it might just tumble, but I'm not seeing where that breeze is going to come from in this position.
Like, you're probably going to castle queenside, but then it takes another move to play rook g7, then yet another move to get the rook doubled up there. And it might be a legitimate attack, and I don't think that White's king is ever going to find true safety.
Right.
But at some moment, I might be able to turn this one around as well, because your queen on c4 is at least in a bit of not danger, but it allows me to at least strive for something. I do like Black's chances, though. You want queen e2.
Okay, so he's just trying to trade off and simplify.
It's probably a much smarter choice than my move.
h4 was exciting, but I can see if you're actually playing this and you're worried about getting under some attack, you're just going to go for the safe line.
Yeah, queen e2. If we trade queens, I simply take with my knight. Yes, you finally get your h4 move, and I can steal your pawn on c7. Even if that pawn we're not hanging, I can play bishop f4. I protected g2. I protected f3.
Right, and White is totally fine here.
Wow.
Wait,
he took.
I'm surprised as well. Did he not have a place to retreat his queen?
I thought he was going to bring his queen to one of these squares, but instead he trades queen. But now White is up a pawn, so I really like White's position.
Yep, this is the risk we talked about with the gambit, simplifying into the endgame too quickly without enough compensation.
Yep.
And this is what seems like just happened.
Yeah, so Ipatov can now breathe. He can take a step back. He's like, well, now I'm playing in a middle game where maybe Black still has some chances, but White's just up a pawn. So I like the position. Let's keep going. We have looked at this one for a long while. We have many other games still in session here. The game we looked at earlier between Daniel Fridman and Wei Yi.
Well, that bishop is still on c8. I'm so shocked.
And Black's down a pawn.
And Black is down a pawn. And his queen is on a6 without space. And White has all of the advantage on the queen side. And Black's king is totally sound. Should we keep going here, or?
Yeah, everything you said is true, that it just clearly White is better. In fact, Black gave up the pawn because if we just go back a few moves, he brought his queen back out again, probably trying to not allow bishop e5 hitting the queen. But the queen kept going. White pushes the pawn to a4, which has, you can take this pawn on b3, but there must be something here that made him not do that.
Maybe rook c3 and bishop a3.
But then I get to trade queens, right? Like, because our queens are in a line.
True.
But I was looking at something like that as well. So maybe he had to just try this, because what happened in the game?
Bishop takes f6 and then rook takes. No, but that's not as scary either. Yeah.
But like, what happened in the game is just so much worse. b4, you can't take it because I get a bishop takes f6 and the bishop hangs on b4. And so he just gives up a pawn. And what is with the tactics in this game? Bishop d6, cutting off some circulation with his knight on d5.
And just one thing, since we went by those really quickly, it seems like he gave the pawn because otherwise he's never going to develop his pieces. So he would rather give up a pawn than keep his bishop stuck on c8 the entire game, which we already talked about would be this theme earlier on. So good to reiterate there.
And also the queen has been in danger of getting trapped, and that's actually why bishop d6 was played. Now b5 traps this queen on a6.
Oh, that is so pretty.
Yep, that is unfortunate. And queen to b6 played, saying at least I get
some compensation.
2 minor pieces, but no, this is clearly not enough. And in fact, I think we won't see this game last too much longer. I would even consider taking this knight on d5. And when you up a lot of material, sometimes you can even give some back with like an exchange sacrifice. I'm not advising you play rook takes c8, but when you have a lot of extra material, it sometimes is the way to go. But
you're just saying it's so over that you could even sack and still be fine.
And now the knight's trap, yeah. The knight has to go to f6, only safe square, and I go e5. That's a big issue. So, yeah, this is game over. That was really nice play.
It was.
So
it was. He had a nice position, but then he played it perfectly. And that's what you often see when you have a better position strategically. Eventually, it converts into a tactical advantage.
Exactly. And, well, he heard me criticizing him. And, yes, Dana Freeman's going to win this queen by playing rook to d1 check, or not, resignation, because rook d1, it's very simple. I take on d1, you take my queen, I give you a check. Your only move is bishop f8, and I play rook c1, and down goes your bishop on c8. It's pinned, so I'm
very, very nice finish to this game.
So Wei Yi, the champion that China needs right now. Let's go to Chess Fat Bear, because out of the corner of my eye, I saw this board here, and, well, there is a bishop pinning a knight. Black has a rook and white doesn't, so it's an exchange up for black.
But that rook is not very useful right now, and it's actually challenging to get the rook from h8 out, because if you ever move the king, say to g7, then there's bishop f6 pinning the king to the rook.
Yep.
If you play the king to g8 and h7, which would be slower, then as soon as the king goes to g8, you could play bishop f6, forcing the rook to come up. So it's actually slightly annoying trying to figure out a plan to get your rook out.
Very true. So I would focus, if I were black, on this bishop e4 pin on the knight on f3, because if I can just get one more piece attacking with like a knight takes d4. So actually here, if I play take, I'm thinking like in queen c2.
Oh, that's a nice find.
But then I have to be worried, because you raised a very good point that my rook is trapped. Like this pawn on a7 doesn't feel very safe either. So let's say we get to this type of position. The knight isn't exactly a very good piece against two bishops.
True. And the white king here is so much more active that you're not actually trying to attack the a7 pawn with your bishop, which is the more natural plan, because your bishop is busy keeping the rook on h8, but your king is just going to come march up towards it, and a knight against just the king and a bishop is not going to be enough.
Yeah, that would be tough. And, well, he goes for the slower, right, just gives up the rook, saying that this pin is just so worth it that you can take the material because you're not actually getting out of this. Really brave decision. I don't know if it's necessarily the best decision, but I still like black's position even after a sort of trade here. As if we look at the material, even material, this bishop is so strong here, and this pawn on d4 is a potential target. So
it is strong. I guess the black queen would like to be on b6 if possible, so that he is helping support. But white has a lot of counterplay here. What? He didn't even take the rook. And why can't we take that piece?
Because knight g5 check, and if king g8, I think he's trying to queen b7.
That is so nice.
It's like trying to mate, and if you take me, I take with the pawn, and you can't stop me from queening.
Wow.
Chess is ridiculous, you know? So he took the knight. See, that's a smart move. You take the knight, but that means it was a good decision by white to do this, because if I can steal your knight off the board, this bishop is very strong. And I don't even have to take your knight right away, but it just doesn't feel like the black king is super safe.
It is. Oh, sorry.
No, the rook's just not active.
I just find it so funny that the rook still can't get out. He can't play rook e8 and rook e7 to get out. There's no way, because the queen is blocking. He has to first move his queen.
Yeah, which at some point queen b7 will be an option for white, just saying, I'm going to transition into a pure endgame where my pawn on b7 is very strong. So you have to watch out for that. But in the meantime, it's hard to move the white queen because the pawn on d4 is also under attack. Right. So it's not like white's plan is super easy either.
And it is good that he moved his rook away from the threat, because it does show that his plan is to get the rook out and flex his material advantage.
Definitely wants to flex that. And I like this move king g2, just preemptively saying knight d4, if you end up capturing it, will not come with a check. And, well, queen b8. So here comes the rook trying to make its way out. And queen b7 is the first idea that comes to my mind. I'm not positive if it works or not, but the whole point is that if we do trade queens, I have this bishop a6 move, and at the very least, I'm sort of stopping you in your tracks.
Right. The only challenge here is that it's really difficult to kick the rook out from b8.
Right. You need the bishop somehow to get over here.
Right.
Queen A3. All right, so keeping the queen alive, saying that, ooh, all right, well, that's a pawn. And actually, that looks like a good pawn to steal at this moment.
He just grabbed it. For some reason, I didn't even consider him taking the pawn.
Whoa. Whoa.
Okay, pawn takes is going to get checkmated after queen e7.
Yep.
So that's not going to work. But let's go back.
So then
King takes.
There's queen e3 hitting your knight and threatening to come checkmate you as well.
Okay.
What a move.
Oh, wow.
Like, I was physically stunned. I had to jump back.
No, I saw. You were stunned. I was trying to understand what's happening here.
Oh my gosh! And if you can't capture that, if you have to play a move like King
and you lose
G,
h5 as well in the worst case.
Yeah, and your king is still very weak over there. So maybe knight takes d4.
Oh, he got too greedy.
Yeah, he took a bite of the forbidden fruit.
What should he have? No, his knight was blocking that threat. Yeah.
His knight was in front of it, so he might have taken a bite of the forbidden fruit there. And well, Sergei Movsesian didn't need to be asked twice. And look at the time situation. Oh, if you had to move your king back,
it's not good.
That's not a good sign. And I think you can just go ahead and take this pawn. You can also consider making a move like queen to d3, which hits the knight, and actually that threatens mate on
checkmate, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But then maybe knight f5.
But then I just say.
But you take and you're gonna checkmate anyway.
Yep. Here comes the mate. So let's queen d3 played.
Respect the bishop pair.
Sergei Movsesian, we have him on camera. He doesn't
even look pleased with himself.
He looks focused. He looks determined. And honestly, I'm saying it, game of the week right there. I mean, move of the week, I don't know. That was really just a fantastic bait and then a shot with the queen a3 saying, oh, my d4 pawn is hanging.
Right.
But there comes the mate. Wow, that's pretty.
Taking advantage of Zhao Jun's time situation. That was gorgeous. I agree.
I'm glad we stayed on this game because, well, this is sad news for the chess back there, but great news for the Israel counselors. Just take that thing.
Yep. We're going to see the final blow very soon.
Yep.
And so I'm guessing that Movsesian is a free agent since he's from Armenia.
Yeah,
unless he's living in Israel.
No, he's not living in Israel. I think he played for the Slovakian team at some point.
Okay.
But he's originally from Armenia. He used to be 2750 plus, like
wow.
A super strong player. Went through a bit of a rough patch. Still is well respected. And look at this queen move.
Uh-oh.
That queen is
Black finding a way to defend against this?
Okay.
Because nope, because queen h6, he's gonna play queen h7, which stops both threats.
And queen e4 check is a good idea to try to trade the queens off as well. So perhaps we spoke a moment too soon here, as it does look like Movsesian is trying to weasel his way out. A move that can be played is e6, and if you take, I have queen g5, you no longer have queen g6, and I go ahead and mate you.
But isn't the issue with that queen e4 check?
Right. So e6, queen e4 check. I think I can just trade and play e7. Your king can't really approach the pawn too easily, but if you do get out in time, let's say here, I might play g4, and the point is h5. Your king has no way to escape.
So maybe there's not a checkmate right away, but white is still winning with this plan.
So I like his king h2 move, and then the rook move, and so e6.
So e6 still working here.
Rook c1. Can I try to checkmate white now all of a sudden?
But then rook c1 is going to fall to me.
Queen g5 check, and the rook is hanging. The queen has to come back, so you just go ahead and win the rook.
Okay, very nice.
That actually is...
Although you win the rook, but then black's going to get the bishop.
There's also pawn. This is actually easier. Pawn takes f7. That's the key. Oh, queen g5. So he made his life a little bit more difficult, but pawn takes f7. The point is now your king is walking into a check, so I just go here and then take your rook for free. And if you go here, I go bishop e7, forcing your king off, and then I get a new queen and mate you.
Right, because now it seems like he's giving black some counterplay after queen g6.
Right, because what's this material count going to be? I take you on c1, you take me on f6. White is still going to be up a pawn, but just one pawn. And
compared to being up a full bishop. So maybe white doesn't even want to take the rook is what I was going to say. And now queen c7 check is a follow-up. So if you're going to have that past a pawn, then you're winning once again.
Oh, that's so clutch too, right? The queen also protects the f2 pawn, which is black's entire point. And that's a good move. Maybe f4 now. I guess you can slow play it a little bit.
I was going to say, with the king on h2, there's no checks, which is really nice, but his king needs to protect the f2 pawn at some point.
Nice. That's a much better square.
And you can't play queen a1 because your own pawn is blocking you.
And now that you induced this d3 move, well, actually, that pawn is pretty close. Take this pawn. Take it.
You can take it next move.
But now that pawn's protected,
I mean, it's looking like this might end in a draw.
But he's about to lose this pawn with it. Okay, that's a good move because otherwise it would have been check and take. Now that queen g5, you can't take because your king's not close enough. If the king were on g2, you could take queen to win, but without the king being close enough, you cannot do that. So he's going to play king g1 or king g2 next.
So
you have to go back.
White, even though white's up a pawn, the d3 pawn is a lot more dangerous. That's why he can't just take the h5 pawn because you get d2.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to check, and I still can't trade queens, annoyingly. So queen d1, have to. But black's
queen
queen
e3 and queen. You can't play queen e3 though, but you can play queen c3.
Right.
To try to get your queen on c1. So the idea here, if black is trying to push, is to somehow get his queen on the last square.
A queen check. The thing is, you can never block because I get a queen. So actually, this is a really smart strategy by black. This is an amazing game.
It has been. It has been.
This has been really fantastic.
There were
stuff.
some tactics missed.